Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. There's a ton of money that's being pumped into research about the brain, which is awesome because it was kind of neglected for a long time, but more and more money is coming into the whole research field and studying some really fascinating things. As laboratory science has gotten more and more sophisticated, there's more and more ways of understanding and sort of peering into the brain and understanding its functions, especially as it correlates with the rest of the body. So there's a lot of really interesting information connecting the brain and the gastrointestinal tract. Sometimes we call it the gut-brain connection or the gut-brain axis. And there's sort of a bidirectional signaling system between the gut and the brain. And in research, we call information that goes from research to sort of clinical medicine, translational medicine. Translational medicine is a really developing field of medicine that has a pretty keen aim to take information from the research to quickly influence what happens clinically. They sort of call it benchtop to bedside research. And the study that I want to talk to you about today is certainly that. In fact, it was published in a journal called Translational Psychiatry, and it's in collaboration of University of Georgia and University of Southern California. And it was published just a few days ago. It's really interesting, helping us understand the connection between the gut and the brain. So what they looked at, what they sort of discovered, just to kind of cut to the chase, is that the brain has a really important memory center called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is about right here. It's kind of in the bottom, it's in sort of the bottom part of the brain. And it's a really key part of the brain for memory storage and memory function. And in fact, it's one of the earliest parts of the brain that degenerates in neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's. So it's a key part of the brain that lots and lots of researchers are looking at from a whole bunch of different angles. But one that this particular group of researchers looked at was the gut-brain connection. And what they found out is that when there's high levels of a particular type, sort of a certain genus of a species in the gastrointestinal tract called Bacteroides, that translated into a higher degree of sort of poor development of the hippocampus. And if there's poor development of the hippocampus, there's going to be poor memory function. And that really puts somebody on the fast track to memory and cognitive impairment. So, a species in the gut called Bacteroides, when that is elevated, that increases the chance of having memory problems. So then they went, all right, how is this particular species called Bacteroides, in fact it was called Peribacteritis, how does Peribacteritis elevate in the gastrointestinal tract, which causes sort of degeneration or lack of proper development of the hippocampus in the brain? So they evaluated diets. We know diet is like the number one way that sort of influences the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome is this kind of the whole totality of all these species in the gut. And we're talking, a couple pounds of bacteria. And there could be a whole variety of good guys, bad guys, and a whole mixture of things. But this Peribacteritis is a specific one that was implicated in the effects of the brain. So how does one increase the Peribacteritis? Like, how does that happen? And the way it happens is through diet. And what about the diet? Sugar. So kids are the number one producers, or let's say number one consumers of foods that have added sugar to it. So here's what they found out is that adolescents who consume sugar on a regular basis have a significant increase of this bacterial species called Peribacteritis, and those who had higher amounts of Peribacteritis from consuming regular amounts of sugar, they had impairment of the normal development of the hippocampus. So this is how key and how sort of nuanced we're getting in understanding. So you think of, as adults, it's like, oh, let's try to stay away from sugar because it increases obesity and diabetes. But give it to the kids, they seem to tolerate it just fine. No, they're not tolerated just fine. It is actually impairing the ability of the hippocampus to develop properly to where later in life it's going to accelerate the chance that they're going to have some kind of impairment cognitively sooner than adolescents who did not consume sugar on a regular basis, which led to that elevation of that particular bacteria called Peribacteritis. It's actually not a bacteria, it's sort of a genus, kind of a whole family of certain types of bacteria. So kids should not be consuming this amount of sugar. It's setting them up for memory impairment later in life. It's impairing the ability of normal neurobiological development of the hippocampus in the developmental stage of the brain. So this is really, really key. Really check the sugar that kids are consuming. They really should not be eating any foods with added sugar to it. I mean, they could eat sugar where, eat foods that have sugar naturally as part of it, berries and fruits and stuff like that. But added sugar, you're putting them in a brain deficit, basically, is what's happening. So I'd really, suggest that you take a good look at any kids in your family and really make sure they're not eating foods with impaired or foods with added sugar too, because we know that it impairs the normal balance of the gut microbiome. We have an elevation of that important species, which is Peribacteritis, and that influences normal and healthy development of the hippocampus, which is setting them up for later in life for having memory deficit. These are the connections that we're making these days. So that's really key. Hopefully that helps to shed some light on, just some basic foundational things of how the gut and the brain are connected. So I will keep reading the studies and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.